The late morning sun spilled across the glass walls of my office, turning the skyline of Manhattan into a mosaic of gold and steel. I sat at the head of the conference table, a silk blouse smoothing against my skin every time I shifted in my chair. My diamond pen rested between my fingers, its weight familiar, grounding. The agenda in front of me was clear: finalize the terms of a major investment deal. My assistant, Chloe, moved silently across the room, setting a cappuccino beside me. I caught the faint aroma of cinnamon before taking a sip. Everything about this moment radiated control, elegance, and secrecy. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and froze. Richard Hale. I hadn't seen his name in years, but my body remembered. My heart gave a sharp, involuntary kick. Richard was the man who had humiliated me in front of an entire office, stripped me of my job, and made sure everyone knew I wasn't cut out for business. I took a slow breath. The email subject line was short, almost desperate. Urgent, meeting request. What he didn't know, couldn't possibly imagine, was that the meeting he'd begged for was already on my calendar. And that the anonymous lead investor he was about to pie 3 years ago, I was just another overworked junior account manager at Hale & Company, running on too much caffeine and too little sleep. My morning started before dawn, answering emails in my tiny studio apartment in Queens before racing to catch the 7:15 into Midtown. I thought the grind meant I was proving myself. Richard Hale, my boss, made sure I never forgot my place. He had a voice like gravel and a smile that never reached his eyes. At first, I told myself his sharp criticism was just tough love. But the truth was, Richard liked an audience for his power plays. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. We were in the main conference room, glass walls exposing us to the entire floor. I had worked for weeks on a client proposal, double-checking every number, every chart. I'd barely slept the night before, staying up to polish the final slides. Halfway through my presentation, Richard interrupted me. "This is sloppy work, Emily," he said, his voice cutting through the room. Heads turned. My cheeks burned. I followed the brief exactly. I started. He slammed a folder onto the table. "No, you followed your idea of the brief, which is why we're about to lose a client. Maybe this job is too big for you." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke. My hands trembled as I tried to turn the page on my notes. I could feel the sting behind my eyes, but I swallowed it down. That night, I called my mother. She didn't have much, but she had wisdom that felt like steel. "Don't give him the ending he wants," she told me. "You write your own ending, Emily." She'd given me a silver bracelet years earlier, engraved with 3 words, "Know your worth." I slid it onto my wrist before bed and stared at the ceiling until morning. The next day, I walked into Richard's office with my resignation letter. He didn't even look up from his laptop when I set it on his desk. "Figured you'd quit," he muttered. I left without another word. But inside, I made a promise. The next time Richard Hale saw me, he'd regret ever underestimating me. The weeks after I left Hale & Company were a blur of fear and determination. I had no steady income, a dwindling savings account, and rent due in 2 weeks. But I also had something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. I started small, taking on freelance marketing projects for small businesses around the city. Coffee shops, boutique stores, local service providers. Anyone who would give me a chance. I worked from my kitchen table, my laptop balanced between bills and half-empty mugs of coffee. Every night, I wore the silver bracelet my mother had given me, its cool weight a reminder of the vow I'd made. One evening, while working at a shared co-working space in Brooklyn, I met Margaret Lawson. She was a retired investment executive with a reputation for spotting raw talent. She'd overheard me on a client call and, after I hung up, walked over with a knowing smile. "You've got a good head for business," she said, "but you're underselling yourself." Margaret became my mentor, introducing me to the basics of venture capital and strategic investment. She didn't sugarcoat the challenges. "In this industry, you'll have to be twice as prepared and twice as unshakable," she warned. I listened. I learned. The work was grueling. I attended workshops on finance, devoured books on entrepreneurship, and shadowed Margaret in meetings where deals were made with a handshake and a nod. I pitched ideas to investors who laughed me out of the room. I faced no so many times it stopped feeling personal. But slowly, wins began stacking up. My first profitable project came from helping a struggling cafe rebrand and launched an online delivery service. Within 3 months, their sales doubled. I took my modest earnings and reinvested them. I funded a small clothing startup run by 2 college friends. Within a year, they were turning a steady profit. With every success, my confidence grew. My network expanded. My investments got bigger. I started traveling Los Angeles, Chicago, even Miami, meeting with entrepreneurs and scoping out opportunities. On paper, my portfolio was small but solid. In reality, I was building something powerful. I kept my success quiet. On social media, I posted vague updates, a coffee cup on a meeting table, a photo of the city skyline, a quick shot of my laptop at an airport. Friends assumed I was just doing okay. My family knew I was working hard, but I never shared the numbers. By the end of my second year, I had enough capital to become a silent investor in several promising ventures. That's when Margaret suggested I start looking into larger corporate opportunities. "There's power in being underestimated," she said one afternoon over lunch. "Let them think you're small until you're holding the pen at the signing table." I smiled, not knowing how prophetic those words would be, because the next big deal that landed in my inbox would have Richard Hale's name on it. The conference room on the 43rd floor of the Madison Tower smelled faintly of fresh coffee and polished wood. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened to a panoramic view of Manhattan, the afternoon sun casting sharp shadows across the long mahogany table. I arrived 10 minutes early, my tailored navy suit fitting like armor. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I crossed the room, each step deliberate. My assistant placed a neatly organized folder in front of my seat. The silver bracelet on my wrist caught the light, my quiet reminder of why I was here. Chloe leaned in. "They're on their way up." When the glass doors opened, I saw him. Richard Hale. A little grayer at the temples, lines etched deeper around his eyes, but still carrying himself with the same self-importance. Behind him trailed 2 junior associates, both clutching laptops like lifelines. He didn't notice me at first. His gaze was fixed on the head of the table, my seat. He hesitated, confused, before forcing a polite smile. "We must be waiting for the lead investor," he said, his tone overly casual. "I'm already here," I said evenly. His eyes darted to me, recognition dawning in slow, almost painful motion. "Emily? It's Ms. Carter now," I corrected. "And yes, I'm the lead investor." The silence was thick enough to cut. His associates exchanged quick, uncertain glances. Richard's smile faltered. I gestured for him to sit. "You've prepared a pitch, I assume." To his credit, he did. For the next 30 minutes, he went through slides detailing Hale and Company's current struggles, declining revenue, loss of major clients, high turnover. The confident bluster I remembered from years ago was still there, but thinner now, fraying at the edges. When he finished, I closed the folder in front of me. "I've reviewed your numbers. Your company is salvageable, but it will require more than money." Richard straightened, defensive. "We've hit some challenges, yes, but with the right capital." "It's not just about capital," I interrupted, my voice steady. "It's about culture. And I know exactly what kind of culture you've been running." His jaw tightened. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. "Do you remember the day you fired me in that conference room? In front of half the staff?" His eyes flickered. "Emily, that was years ago." "Yes. Years ago, you decided I wasn't cut out for business. You embarrassed me publicly, dismissed my work without a second thought. That moment cost me my job, but it also gave me something you didn't count on." Richard said nothing. "It gave me the push to build my own career, my own capital, my own terms. And now, those terms are what stand between your company and bankruptcy." I let the words settle. The view outside the windows glittered with late daylight, a silent reminder that this was my city now, my playing field. Finally, I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "These are my conditions. If you accept them, I'll invest. If not, I walk, and so will any other investor who sees these numbers. Richard looked down at the list, his eyes scanning. His face paled slightly. Think it over, I said, rising from my chair. You have until tomorrow. Chloe will show you out. As I walked toward the window, I caught a glimpse of his reflection in the glass, the same man who had once made me feel small, now visibly struggling to find his footing. It was exactly the reversal I'd imagined the night I left his office for the last time. The next morning, I arrived at my office to find Richard already waiting in the lobby. His tie was slightly askew, and the confident posture I remembered had softened into something more careful. He stood when I approached. I've read your terms, he said quietly. I'll agree to them. We rode the elevator up in silence. When we stepped into the boardroom, I gestured toward the chair opposite mine. The same chair I'd once occupied across from him years ago, when the power balance was so different. Let's go over the conditions, I said, flipping open the folder. First, Hale and Company would implement a zero-tolerance policy for public humiliation or workplace bullying. Any manager violating it would face immediate termination. He nodded stiffly. Second, salaries for junior staff would be raised to industry standard within 6 months. Your people are your foundation, I said. You can't build a company on resentment and fear. Richard shifted in his seat, but didn't argue. Third, a new mentorship program for women in the company, with quarterly progress reports sent directly to me. His brow furrowed. Why so specific? I held his gaze. Because I know exactly what opportunities you've been overlooking. Fourth, I would hold a 40% equity stake and final say in all major strategic decisions. Richard's lips pressed into a thin line, but he signed the page without comment. Last condition, I said. You'll personally apologize to the employees you've wronged, starting with the staff who were there the day you fired me. For a moment, he looked like he might refuse. But then his shoulders dropped, and he gave a curt nod. Fine. When the papers were signed, I extended my hand. Welcome to a new era for Hale and Company. He shook it, his grip firm but lacking the dominance it once held. As he left, Chloe stepped into the room, eyebrows raised. That must have felt good. I smiled, not with gloating, but with the calm satisfaction of someone who has turned pain into power. It's not about feeling good, I said. It's about making sure no one else goes through what I did. I knew change wouldn't happen overnight. But the moment Richard walked out of that room under my terms, the shift was already in motion. The same man who once wrote my ending now had to work within the story I authored. And this time I was holding the pen. Over the next few months, the transformation at Hale and Company was impossible to ignore. The break room, once a place where whispers died as soon as management walked in, now buzzed with open conversation. Junior staff stopped glancing nervously over their shoulders. New ideas were flowing and being taken seriously. I watched Richard change, too. It wasn't overnight, but slowly, the sharp edge in his voice softened. The first time I saw him pause to actually listen during a team meeting, I almost didn't recognize him. The mentorship program for women was thriving. Young associates began stopping by my office during their quarterly progress reviews, their faces lit with the kind of ambition I used to hide. They weren't afraid to speak up. They weren't afraid to be seen. One Friday evening, after a long day of back-to-back meetings, I found myself alone in my office. The city glowed outside my window, each light in the skyline a tiny reminder of lives being lived, battles being fought, dreams being built. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the silver bracelet. The engraving caught the warm lamplight. Know your worth. I ran my thumb over the words, feeling the cool metal against my skin. It had been with me through every low and every triumph. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who stood in a glass-walled conference room, cheeks burning, hands shaking, as her boss tore her down. I thought about the night I left that office, unsure how I'd survive, but certain I wouldn't let him define me. And now, here I was, not just surviving, but shaping the future of the very company that once pushed me out. I fastened the bracelet back onto my wrist and smiled, a quiet, private smile that came from knowing I had rewritten the ending exactly the way my mother had told me I could. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. About proving, to him, to the world, and most importantly, to myself, that I had always been cut out for business. As I turned off the lights and stepped out into the cool night air, my final thought was simple, clear, and certain. No one gets to decide my worth, but me.